Now, just to further emphasize and elucidate the very important point mentioned in part 1, that it was not and that it is not the intention of the slave masters and their slavery economic system to have us learn their language. Please allow me to now quote from an infamous document known as the Willie Lynch Letter, titled The Making of a Slave. And I will quote from this section of that infamous letter on language, or if you prefer, the section on the control of language. By the way, if you have not yet read or heard of this letter, this infamous document, the Willie Lynch Letter, if you haven't heard of it before, I strongly recommend that you just Google it, you just search it, research it. You can download it right here on the internet, and I strongly recommend that you read it at your earliest convenience. In fact, if you are watching this program right now, I would suggest that you download it or bring it up on some website so you can read and follow along with me. Now, let me quote from this infamous document, and I quote: "Crossbreeding completed for the furtherance or for the further severance from their original beginning, we must completely annihilate the mother tongue of both the nigger and the new mule, and institute a new language that involves the new life's work of both," unquote. I ask that you please take note and please bear in mind the following four words. Word number one, severance. Number two, the word tongue. Number three, the word language. And number four, the word annihilate or annihilate. The word severance, according to the English dictionary, or one English dictionary, the word severance means to sever, to separate, to divide. But above all, the word severance means to tear apart with violence, to divide with violence. The word language, what does it mean? In other words, what is a language? The word language, in terms of our human speech and communication, and I always like to specify, because if or when you know the meaning of the word language, you will realize that there are many languages. Languages amongst the animals, or the animal domain, the plants domain, the technology domain, if you will. Examples, computer language. We have computer language. We have the language of mathematics, the language of music. And in terms of mysticism, occultism, and metaphysics, there are angelic languages, spiritual languages, languages of the gods, and languages of other domains, other realms and dimensions, etc. Just food for thought. But when we're speaking of language in terms of human speech and communication, language is the power and the power and ability to express ourselves, or to express that which we call our ideas and our thoughts in the written, the spoken, or symbolic words. The word tongue is also synonymous with the word language because it is the literal organ that is used to speak words in a language, and thus it is sometimes used alternately. Now, each individual, once you understand this, you will also understand that each individual group of people, if you prefer, each individual race of people has and speaks its own unique language and in its own tongue. Now, let me take the word language a step further. Some of us, if not most of us humans, think that we are superior to all other animals and all our fellow earthlings, and as such, some of us believe we have the right, we have the power and the ability to subdue, to dominate, to manipulate, and to control them. And the main reason that is given for this is that we have, or because we have the mental power and ability to think and use language and the spoken, written, and symbolic words to communicate with each other and to express our thoughts and our intentions. Outside of this ability, or these abilities, we are said to be no different than the animals that some of us call and claim to be lower and dumb. Language is therefore an expression of our intelligence, an expression of our mental power and ability. It is through the effective use of language, its written, spoken, and symbolic words, that we learn about ourselves, that we learn about our natural world and our universe, and also our multiverses. And it is also through the effective use of language that we develop our intellect and our mind. A person's level of training and education in the system and otherwise, and a person's intelligence can be reasonably judged by his or her knowledge and use of his native language, and also his or her knowledge and use of the language that he or she uses to express him or herself. And so from this we can see that there is an inseparable link between language, intelligence, and our human mind. Now, I want you to note something very important here, my friends, my viewers. If you truly understand what I have just said, and if it is true, meaning that it is through the effective use of language that we develop our intellect and our mind, then it must also be true that if we were severed from our mother language and our mother tongue, to be more precise, let me say it another way. If we, meaning our African ancestors, if it is true that we, meaning our African ancestors, and us, their descendants today, if we were violently torn apart, violently separated, violently severed from our mother language and from our mother tongue, if we don't have our own language, if we are not speaking in our own language and with our own tongue, if the language that we are using to communicate and express ourselves is an alien language, a foreign language, meaning it is not native to us. It is not one that is naturally coded and embedded in our DNA. Then, to our African system, as Africans, it is like a destructive alien virus. And as such, it does not and it cannot naturally resonate or naturally resonate with our latent intelligence and with the core of our being when we speak. And this is just one of the reasons why we are so ineffective. I have to be trying hard to speak this language. We say a lot of things and we pray for a lot of things. We pray a lot of prayers, but nothing happened, or very little happened. And why? For without our own language, we are and we must be confused, which again is one of the intention of the system and their manipulators, to confuse and control, to confound and conquer. But more on that next time. From my perspective, this is also one of the many reasons why many of our children are having so much problems today absorbing, assimilating, processing, and digesting the system's education. And unfortunately, they are sometimes given all kinds of labels and are legally segregated and discriminated by the system's appointees and administrators because they are not speaking in their own language. The language is the problem. Names, they are given names and labels such as learning disorders and some other T's, I can't remember them right now. Right? This also means that we don't need any of the systems trained. Once you understand this, that language is the problem and we are not speaking our own language, and if you understand what is being done to our mind, our brain, and our whole being, but this is not the whole, this is not the presentation to get into all the details of that. I can only say so much on this subject right here. But once we as a people understand the impact that this bastardized version of the English language that we are trying to speak, to express ourselves, when we understand that that is the problem that our kids are having and creating all this so-called learning disability, then possibly we will be able to take steps to remedy it. And then by this, this also means that we won't and we don't need any of the systems trained and sanctioned educators. They're doctors and psychologists and scientists to tell us, descendants of Africans, that the development of our intellect and our mind are being sabotaged and being short-circuited and severely handicapped by the alien language that we are being forced to learn. From my perspective, if we had our own language and our own mother tongue, and we were speaking our own mother tongue, in other words, if our ancestors were allowed to keep their own language and mother tongue, and we were allowed to inherit it naturally, then it would not have been, we would not be having any so-called learning disabilities or learning disorders and so-called low IQ tests or low IQ today. We would not be doing so. In fact, I'm reminded of Dr. Sibi, who pointed out the fact that if you give, if I remember well, if you feed the tiger, I'm paraphrasing now, if you feed, I think it's a chimpanzee or something like that, with a bear food or vice versa, then simply speaking, you will have a problem. The bears or the animals cannot grow or progress the way they should in their natural environment. So if we are using our natural language, speaking in our natural tongue, all the put downs that we people of African descent are getting, talking about we are dumb and we can't learn and we can't write and read and write English. English is not our language. And the bad thing about it is that some of our parents and some of our own people, because of ignorance, and I don't blame you, you don't know any better, are putting our kids and our people down when they can't speak like the British English and these European Caucasian people. We can't handle the language. It is not ours. We should have our own language, speaking our own tongue, and then we'll see a difference. Let that happen and you will see the difference. Anyhow, I don't want to get carried away here. Let me continue with the main point of this presentation that I've prepared, because I have to be honest, I have to write my stuff in order to speak it how I want to say it, because I will get carried away and I get very emotional about this subject, right? So that's why I prepare. So if you notice me looking down, I'm not afraid to say I don't have the monitors like President Obama to pretend as if I'm looking at you and speaking at you. So I have to read. I prepare first before I come to you. So please understand, it's not my language. Okay, so let me get back to where I was. So we wouldn't be having these low IQ problems and so-called learning disorders if we were speaking and using our own language. For we would be able, if we were using our own language, like what some other cultures do, they teach their kids their original language, right? Then they are able to learn and translate. So if we would be able to learn in our own language, and when and where necessary, we would not only translate, but we would also transliterate as well. Okay. It is also self-evident that whoever and whatever that is able to influence and control our language, or the language that we are using to express our innermost thoughts and intentions, can also control and sabotage our intelligence and our mind's progress and development. Another important fact that I must also point out here, and hopefully some of you may think very seriously about it, is that whenever we are using another language, other than our own native language and tongue, that we are a slave to the owners of that language. We are a slave mentally and physically as well. The owner of the language owns our minds, because we must now be mentally possessed. We must now be filled with the spirit of their language. We must now be mentally possessed by his language. We must now allow our DNA to be programmed and to realigned to his language, to be realigned to his language. We must now think in his language. We must now know all the meanings and definitions of his language, and definition of the words of his language. We must know and abide by all the rules that he sets up to govern his language. We must now speak with and in his tongue. Therefore, we cannot truly have any secrets of our own. In Willie Lynch letters, you remember he talks about knowing the secrets if we know his language. So we have no secrets of our own once we are using his language, because we are owned by them, mentally and otherwise. There will be hardly anything, if at all anything, that we can say that he won't know and understand. What can we say in the man's language that he concocted, even the bastardized version that he concocted and gave to us? What can we say that he won't know? I submit nothing. We can hardly have any plans that he can't and won't infiltrate and interrupt. So just to remind some of you, the fact that we are still using the English language, the slave masters' heirs and successors language, and particularly the new bastardized version, or the new bastardized slave version that they gave us, the fact that we are still using and depending upon it as our main language, and for many of us it is our only means of communication. Because when I try to talk in my great Jamaican language, Part2, which makes no sense even talking in it anyhow, because our people teach all the secrets and all the knowledge to other people. So we have no language. Not even Part2 we can talk and they don't understand it. But let me continue. So as long as we have to be using their language, and some of us have no other means of communication but to be using their language, it is evident that we are still their slaves. But I promise that is a whole different subject, and I promise we'll be talking more about that right here on the right number. So please stay tuned. See me in part 3.